What's up, everybody? Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Lambert, and we are going live, but I have a special treat because I was updated yesterday evening when I gave a quick phone call to Dionysus, and I said, hey, Dionysus, how's it going? Good? Good. Would you join me for a live stream? You might think I'm bluffing you, but I'm not. Dionysus in the flesh here, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back, Dr. Dennis R. MacDonald. How are you?
Well, the name Dennis comes from Dionysus. That's why you put it that way.
Yes, sir.
I'm fine. I wanted to say that these are new graphics for your introduction. I hadn't seen those before.
Yes.
And you are a master of putting those together.
Thank you.
And one of the things I really appreciated about it is you weren't considering myth as falsehoods. Myths are people's truths. And that's true for the New Testament. And unfortunately, too many people read the Bible and understand these things to be fixed truths. And they're not. They're human meanings. And they're ways of trying to make sense of the world for their communities or for themselves and so on. So I thought it was majestic.
Thank you.
In coming forward. And it's always fun to talk to you.
Yeah.
But let me also say that it's going to be fun to talk to anybody who wants to chat. I love that opportunity. There's nothing more stimulating for me than to know what people may be wondering about or challenging or whatever. And that it really gives me some energy. So I would just encourage anybody who has something to say it, and we'll talk about it.
So super chat, comments, questions, all of that good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, again, I came prepared. I brought your old classic, the Dionysian Gospel. I found that there's all sorts of academics, of course, who echo the sentiments that there's something about John's Gospel that has a lot in common, and you're not the first scholar or the last scholar. But I would say that your work has gone further in really trying to see it throughout the entire Johannine Gospel. And that is a unique thing that you do. Whereas when I read Mark W.G. Stibe's book, John a Storyteller, or read Bultmann's commentary, go read even Courtney Friesen, who I think sees it like you're seeing it, but he's more cautious. Whereas you're like, no, I think we have a real good case for the mimetic connection. That means genetic relationship to Euripides, and you're not tiptoeing around a lot of this stuff. This book obviously goes further in really showing why the Gospel of John improves in competition Jesus to be better than Dionysus. But in order to be better than him, he has to look, he has to act, he has to imitate him. So people talk about plagiarism. Oh, they didn't copy the pagans. And it's like, okay, I think they have the wrong idea of what is meant by copying, because they imagine, oh, they just wrote Dionysus' story and gave him the name Jesus. And it's like, it's more complex and nuanced than that, but there is engagement for sure with this character in crafting Jesus.
Yeah. Well, this is one of my 3 books that's been translated. 2 of them have been translated into modern Greek, and this is one. So even the Greek audience can read in modern Greek the business about Odysseus and so on. But it also is something that was recognized in the 2nd century. Clement of Alexandria recognizes the similarities between Dionysus and Jesus and is not ashamed of imitating it. Mm-hmm. In fact, Jesus appeals to Dionysus to convert, and he uses the introduction to the gospel in order to do it. We have the paraphrase of the Gospel of John by Nonus of Panopolis. And the wonderful thing about that is he wrote the gospel, that text first, and then he wrote the Dionysian, the Dionysiaca, the longest Greek epic ever. And it looks like he believed in Jesus and Dionysus, at least to say that Dionysus takes over Christ's characters. characteristics. So this is not anything new. Now, I want to pick up something you said about the methodology,
Right.
which is mimesis, that is imitation. And we know how imitation was taught in antiquity. And it has three components. And I'm not going to be too scholarly in saying this, but I think it's important to understand how it works. If you want to imitate a text that's on a different topic from what you're going to write on, you choose a typos, a model that you can use to as your form. Then, if you want to announce the similarities between what you're writing and what you're reading or you're imitating, you have to create similarities. These are called homoiouti. And the people take pleasure, ancients took pleasure in reading texts that they could see the background to. But the punchline is called a syncresis. It's a comparison of one story with another.
Mm-hmm.
In cases, the point is to say that your character is as good as the character that's in the model. In some cases, in fact, in many, you want to say that the model has a character that is not as venerable or powerful or compassionate than the one that you're writing for. And that's called an agonistic or a competitive mimesis and a syncresis. What happens in the Gospel of John is a combination. The author is choosing the Bacchae of Euripides for his models about Dionysus. And in many cases, to establish that relationship, you have these similarities. And the similarities end in a syncresis. In some cases, it's to show that Jesus is similar to Dionysus. In other cases, it's to show that Jesus is more compassionate or powerful or wiser. And so that's, again, an agonistic form of syncresis as opposed to a sympathetic one. And the reader is given as a treat the comparison of these characters. Now, why would the author of the Gospel of John, and by the way, it was written in 3 stages. Now, we're not going to talk about the stages here today, but it's only in the first stage where you have all of these Dionysian features. And when I got near the end of the book, I realized why the author went to the trouble of imitating Euripides.
Right.
And Dionysus. The author knows the synoptic gospels, especially Mark and Matthew, but he also knows Luke and even Acts. But in especially Mark, discipleship means suffering, taking your cross, selling your goods, giving to the poor, and so on. The author of the Dionysian gospel, that is the Gospel of John, is probably writing in a context where Dionysian religion is widespread. And there's a gift of eternal life by eating the flesh and drinking the blood of the God. It also is, the Dionysian cult was known for lovemaking and for revelry and for satyrs and dancing and maenads and so on. So if you're going to be in a religious environment where the other religion is showing people a good time, and you're in a religion that requires carrying the cross and getting rid of wealth and so on, waiting for your rewards in heaven, you're going to want to have a different kind of book. And so this is, I think, the earliest Johannine gospel, I think, was a substitute or an addendum to the synoptics. It wasn't really a challenge to them. It was an augmentation of it to show that Jesus gives a good time too. That's why in the beginning of the Gospel of John, we're told that the Logos gives life.
I might as well show it here just to show people this right here.
Yeah, it gives life. Later on, it says that Jesus came to give gift after gift. The version of the Eucharist, in the Gospel of John, is that if you eat this bread and drink the blood, you will have life in you. And you'll have eternal life, which was what the promise was in the Dionysian cult. So now we have Jesus playing a role that's similar to Dionysus, but even greater than Dionysus. He, too, like Dionysus, came from the lap of the Father. Dionysus was birthed from the thigh of Zeus,
right here,
his father, and so on. So from the very beginning, the astute reader will see that Jesus is a good guy. He comes to earth not to punish the way that Dionysus did, but to give gift after gift. That's where your competitive syncresis lies. So you have a model, you exploit the model with the similarities, and then you establish the syncresis at the end, that Jesus is better than Dionysus, but also he's better than the Jesus of the Synoptic Gospels,
right?
Who is demanding so much. Now, the reason that I think this is important to get squared away right away is that mimesis is not theft. It's not mindless plagiarism, as many people have understood it. It's not parallelomania. It's parallelum. It's not parallelophobia. I mean, it's parallel. No, it's not parallelomania. It's meaningful cultural exchange, and it happens over and over again in the Gospel of John. And you've already put together a wonderful display of those texts. But it goes on and on. Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. He can escape from prison, and he can boldly proclaim his message to his opponents. The trial of Jesus in the Gospel of John is much more like the story about Dionysus and Pentheus and that trial than it is the trial in the Synoptic Gospels. So it is a playful and interesting and gripping narrative, but it is not theft. It is not lying. It is creating a character who would be venerable to the Johannine community in light of the gifts that Dionysus is giving.
Absolutely. There's a lot there. Again, John's tragedy, Mark W.G. Stibbe goes that route. And he lays out 11 examples of parallels in John 18 through 19, the parallel, what we find in the Euripides Bacchae, the twin prologues, unrecognized deity, the philanthropic goal, the family sin, the pathos pattern, true worshipers, stoning the god, elusive speech, the city as a symbol, wonder-working stranger, ensemble tragedy. And then you've got 3 acts, arrest and bindings. These are just from Stibbe's work, the God on trial, the killing of a king, Then, of course, there's you going through verse by verse demonstrations, which gives 21 examples in this. This is in his book. I just made a polished version of what Dennis has in his book, 25 examples that directly parallel, and then it ends with the 7 criteria from accessibility, analogy, density, order, distinctive traits, interpretability, and ancient recognition. Every one of these is visible in the case of John and Euripides Bacchae. Now, Dennis, we did get a few super chats. One, just showing some support. Ivy Ann, thank you so much for the super chat and being a member of the channel. Really appreciate it. Keeps the lights on here. We greatly appreciate that. Also, we have Bakken in the house. Thank you, Bakken, for the super chat and being a member as well. Rome outlawed Dionysian mysteries 180 BC. Is John saying the mysteries have returned in Christianity? Are Bacchic baptisms like Paul gospel in theology?
It's like Paul gospel in our Bacchic baptism. No, Bacchic baptisms, you're talking about the Bacchic rites. No, they're not like Paul in theology, but I think you're right about Dionysian mysteries being outlawed. That didn't mean they weren't popular, and they were very popular in the Roman Empire. So we have evidence of Dionysian groups in Western Asia Minor, which is where John probably was, but we have it in Egypt. We certainly have it in Rome. And it wasn't just long ago that you had Dionysian mysteries outlawed, but they were really rife and everywhere in the Roman Empire. Another thing to keep in mind is the popularity of Euripides Bacchae. It was one of the most gripping narratives in Greek tragedy of all time. And unfortunately, not all of it has been preserved, but we know that it was popular. A friend of mine, Courtney Friesen, whom you know and have interviewed, has shown that for Greeks, I mean, for pagans and for Jews and for Christians, the Bacchae was a target for imitation over and over and over again. One of the things that I wish he could have added, and he wrote his book before mine came out, I think he could have added the density of Dionysian traits in the fourth gospel. So he kind of cherry picked some beautiful examples, and I agree with him. And he's, by the way, a terrific scholar and a fine good man, and he's a good hockey player. That's one of my favorites. But the Bacchae was a guarantee for the success of the Dionysian religion in the Roman Empire. So it was outlawed, but in some cases, things that get outlawed get favored.
Yeah. Again, thank you, Bakken, for the support and that super chat. We got another one here in order. After the Bakken, we got Reformed Catholic Noahide. Appreciate that super chat. And they meant to put a message, and their message is this, Dennis. They said, I meant to put a message in that, but isn't the similarity between Jesus and Dionysus post-Christ, not before? I'm putting scare quotes. Post-Christ, not before. What are your thoughts about that, Dennis?
Oh, yes, I think that's right. I think this is a development of the Christian identity over against the Dionysian cult. Now, that's not to say that there weren't similar mythic patterns available in ancient religion.
I think they're asking something more specific, and this comes up often, and that is, well, comparing Jesus and Dionysus, that's all post-Christianity, meaning often online I hear people say, Christians didn't borrow from that. They only borrowed from Scripture. They would never borrow from Dionysus. They have to borrow from Moses and Abraham, and they can't look to the pagan stuff. That's not allowed. That's what I think this question is trying to imply.
And I think that's very helpful, Derek. Thanks. The one place where I think it's very difficult to deny Dionysian kind of influence is in the Christian Eucharist. Already in the Pauline tradition, it's very hard to make a justification for the importance of that rite just from Judaism. And the idea that it's a rite that's related to resurrection and death is really pretty convincing. I had a doctoral student, a very fine Korean scholar, who wrote a dissertation on that very topic, and I just think he nailed it. Now, how much more Dionysian influence there was, it's very difficult to establish. But I think that is a case that you can take to the bank.
Yeah, so nobody doubts, I don't think anyone doubts, that cultural exchange and engagement, whether literary, whether cultural, cultic, you name it, happens after Christianity is around. We get this in fictions, novels, we get this in plays, we get this in all sorts of stuff. But the real question is, did Dionysus already have all this stuff, and then Christianity came along later and thought, oh, it needs to engage with this? And I think Reformed Catholic Noahide is trying to suggest, no, they didn't borrow from Dionysus at all. They followed up even with the whole Eucharist thing, and they said Melchizedek. So their explanation is Melchizedek. But what are your thoughts on that? And then we'll move on.
Well, I don't have anything to say about it, I don't think. The fluidity of mythological patterns and rituals in antiquity is notorious. And your friend Neil is very good at spotting these kinds of similarities. The problem of finding similarities is, can you at the same time find the glue that holds them together from one group to another? And that becomes more difficult, because you can have patterns just because the way that we humans are organized, or the way that societies are organized. So they don't have to be direct borrowings. There are a number of ways that you can talk about the similarities between these motifs. So what the problem is in a lot of mythological study is, where do you find the trails of transmission that go from one similarity to another? One of the things that, by the way, this is an aside, but it's a fascinating one. Folklorists have the same problem, where they have certain stories or myths that go from one culture to another. We know that there's exchange between Egyptian mythology and Greek mythology, Roman mythology and Greek mythology, and so on. And often the transmission of those stories has to do with the military or merchants, who are the ones that are likely to do the most travel and to have the most time in a destination. So I really find that to be fascinating. And actually, I've studied it a little bit in terms of folklore transmission. And it's not, by the way, and missionaries too, who are traveling from place to place, are exposed to multiple narratives and myths, and are likely to be invested in borrowing or creating.
Thank you, Reformed. Appreciate that. I would just make my comment about the Melchizedek thing and say, if you could show me a Melchizedek text that is floating around where it's talking about flesh, chewing on flesh and drinking blood within this Jewish world, I'd be more than happy to go, well, maybe the Jews already adopted this from Dionysus under Ptolemy or something. And we have obviously Hellenization. We know Jews were Hellenized by them. But anyway, that would just be my address, would be, I think you have a better parallel when you look to the Dionysian homophagia and sparagmos, the two practices of the blood and, of course, the flesh chewing that we find of that they believed ritualistically put them in communion with the god. So they believed that by ingesting the animal and the blood of the animal, they would actually be partaking in union with the deity. Kind of like Jesus says, you cannot have life unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood. So if you could show me something with Melchizedek that says that, we're cool. Like, okay, maybe this did come from, but there are other elements that you have to then factor in and explain that Dionysus, I mean, there's a lot that goes on in this book. So it'd be very difficult to, I think, knock that down. But thank you for that super chat. Bakken is back again. Round 2, Bakken. Thank you so much. Says, did people in Rome still do Bacchic rites?
Okay, you left out the word power. Did people in Roman power?
Sorry.
Still do Bacchic rites? Not so much. Because Bacchic groups were more like mystery cults. And I'm sure that there were people who were in power who participated in Dionysian worship, but it was not as dominant as the other the religions of Rome. Mithras actually is similar to Dionysian worship. And we do know that many Roman soldiers were involved in the Mithraic mysteries. But I think it was more of a marginal phenomenon, widespread, but it was probably more esoteric than public.
Interesting. I think of Mark Antony. When he got with Cleopatra after Julius Caesar, they I guess you'd say, came to the Ephesus region and celebrated as though they were the god Dionysus and Isis.
Oh, is that right? Well, there you go. You got the answer.
They had a procession, and there were people dressed up as satyrs and maenads dancing as they were being carried in a, I guess you'd say like a wagon type, very powerful people are carried in, and everybody's dancing, and the flutes are going, and the wine and the sex and the whole nine is going on. Mark Antony and Cleopatra did an actual Bacchic rite, if you will. Mind you, Isis and Dionysus, in union here. So it's really interesting to see. Thank you so much, Bakken. Appreciate that love and support. Got another one here.
For the previous chat, I could have mentioned Third Maccabees and its interest in the Bacchae and Dionysian worship. And and Yahweh, or it's going to be Kyrios, it's the Lord, or the Lord God, is playing the role really of Dionysus. And so and by the way, Courtney Friesen's good on that in talking about how Jews were engaging culturally with Dionysian worship.
Yeah, that's important for our last super chatter, Reformed Catholic Noahide. Because these are PhDs, classicists, experts that are looking at this stuff, and they realize the cultural exchange that goes on between the Jewish and the Greek-Roman world. They're not isolated. They are not borrowing directly from Scripture in every circumstance. And I think that's important. This one is the book, he goes, Acting Gods, Playing Heroes in the Interaction Between Judaism, Christianity, and Greek Drama in the Early Common Era. I think that one, he goes into some of the stuff you just described. His other one, though, which I only have the book cover here, not pulled up on Amazon, is Reading Dionysus.
That's the only one I know.
Yeah, that one piggybacks on what you are arguing. The other thing he does is points out how Paul, in his atonement language in his letters, looks to be mirroring Alcestis or Alcestis, the Heracles play. I meant Heracles, not Heracles. Heracles play, where he resurrects Alcestis from the underworld. And it's an atonement theology where the partner willingly lays their life down for their loved one and goes to death for them. And he points out the Greek and how similar the Greek is in Paul's language to the Alcestis myth, or the play, if you will. And I find that powerful and very interesting to consider. But we're taught that you have to only look to the Bible to explain Bible. You're not allowed to go outside of that invisible shock collar. You know, you get the little shock collar wires in the yards for dogs so they don't go beyond it. You're getting shocked. Oh, no, I'm not allowed to. I have to stick to only this in the Bible. I have to only look to Genesis or Exodus, or like it's got to be within these texts. And then, you know, you find out there's a bigger world, you know?
Okay, I have a really stupid question to ask you.
Please.
Because I'm sure you have a better answer than I. I don't understand why people are so threatened by cultural exchange. It must have to do something with their own social identity and the truth of their religion over against others, so that similarities between one religion and another becomes an issue of contestation instead of cultural engagement. And I think it's unfortunate that we are so threatened by other people's mythologies that we can't grow up and to say, okay, that's not what I believe, but I understand what that's about. And let's chat. Instead, we build walls.
Yeah. I would only be able to say that from my experience, when you're told, especially in a fundamentalist, you know, background, when you're told this one happened, this one is true, you don't write a story borrowing from another story you don't believe is true. So
I knew you'd have a good answer. So yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, because in my mind, the logical conclusion as a fundamentalist is what's pinned to paper happened. And so if you're telling me they needed to borrow from that story to make this story, it cuts through that whole problem in my mind. It makes me go, well, then maybe this one's doubt. Like, should I doubt this? Because it borrows from that other religion. Those gods are fake. Those are false gods. And I think there's also another premise that needs to be pointed out. And it is the kind of the zealous, like evangelizing ideology built into Christianity that needs to crush all alternative examples out there. And if there are parallels, we already have models for, it was devils long ago, demons, evil things that they're not saying are good. It's not like it's not like Justin Martyr's using the just daemon the same way ancient Greek philosophers might have used it. They're using them to act like they're like entities that are not good and aren't doing what's right. They're the ones modeling their religions after the prophecies of Scripture, which foretold Christianity, and they just mimicked it. And so that might subconsciously be also in the Christian mindset when we see that. And we go, oh, no. Kosher, good. Non-kosher, not good, bad.
Yeah. I think we should have a conversation sometime about Joseph Campbell and the hero with 1,000 faces. And I begin my lectures frequently on early Christianity with those lectures with Joseph Campbell. And what he shows is that heroes have certain structures that are similar from place to place. And folklorists come along and they say, Joseph Campbell, not so quick. Yes, you have these similarities, but the differences are as important as the similarities. And so the Christian alternatives to them can be meaningful for those communities, but one has to recognize that you're trading on mythic patterns that are very deep in the human experience.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's a lot to talk about and unpack with that.
Yeah,
that we could do in a future episode if you're interested.
No.
Bakken, thank you so much for another super chat. Wouldn't areas be separated by ethnicity more so than theology? Regional based on human travel. Phenomena and rites would be shared across cultures with trade.
Exactly. I have no quarrel with it, but I would tweak it a little bit. I think ethnicity is one form of social identity, so that in a certain ethnic group, you may have different social identities. And what happens is the social identities are there first, And then people tried to put together their theology, or that is the ideology that supports the values of their social identity. So there's a whole sociological method called social identity theory. And it's an attempt to describe how, and by the way, we all have social identities, and we're not going to escape them. But it's not that theologies create social identities. It's that social identities create theologies to justify what their experience is, not just to themselves, but to the people who are different from them, especially their opponents.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why in the Middle Ages, theology became so contested. It wasn't that they were contesting the theology. It's that they were supporting their social identities over against other social identities. So your chat is right on target. But ethnicity, I think, needs to be broken down into various social identities. And to say, yes, there's a relationship between a social identity and a theology, which is, in my view, an ideology that talks about God. But it's not theology that creates social identity so much as social identity that creates a theology. But then it becomes symbiotic. You use your theology to create people who are going to join your social identity group.
Thank you. Very powerful. Very powerful. Bakken, great question. Thank you for the super chat. A really great question / comment. And then Pagan Prince in the house, thank you for the super chat, says, not to detract from the current subject, since we are covering Greek paganism and Christianity, can we discuss Pan and its potential impact against the growing Christian religion?
I wish I had something to say about that.
I have something. I didn't want to cut you off if you're...
No, please.
Okay, so this is something I'd love to dig into more, but because Pan is this like satyr-looking, horned, rustic, wild nature type of deity, I think it literally folds perfectly into this concept of demons that Christians later on start to caricature paganism as. Eusebius references Plutarch's work, where Plutarch mentions this quote where Pan is dead. Well, the word Pan is the name of the god, but it also can mean all. And so they often theologize this to mean, and guess when Plutarch said this quote was being said? Under Tiberius. So they interpreted Pan is dead to be all pagan deities, which Pan represents, demons, are dead at the time, historically, that Tiberius is on the scene, when Christ is coming. So Christians, found ways in their kind of like propagandistic manner to say, oh, all pagan gods are dead. Pan is dead. Plutarch. That I know. And I do think some of our imagery of Satan, the horned devil kind of figure, I do think Pan has some kind of influence.
That could be. That makes sense.
Yeah. I do think that plays a role. As far as Pan's potential impact on growing Christian religion, I don't know enough about it to be able to address that, but I do know that what I've said you can fact check. So I'm only going with what I know, and that is the limitations of my knowledge with Pan as far as its interaction with Christianity. Yeah. Very, very interesting. So Dennis, I want to ask you, because you wrote the book, okay, and you're going to live forever, just not here on this earth, okay? You've already ingested the deity Dionysus several times over. What would you say are the most, let's just use maybe 5 to 10, I'll let you take the liberty of choosing, the best pieces of evidence in your view that convinces you and you think should be convincing to anyone who takes serious and studies this in depth, that John's gospel is imitating Euripides Bacchae. What are the top 5 to 10 pieces of evidence that you think are just overwhelmingly obvious to you?
Okay, I'm going to do it as, I haven't thought of it this way, but I'm going to take the most obvious ones and then go down I'll try to get to 5. I can maybe get beyond that, but
Okay.
The most obvious one is the Johannine Eucharist. The drinking the blood, having the flesh. It's different from what you have in the synoptics. It's the importance of it's not just eating the bread, the bread. It's chewing it. Tragon is the participle, and I think that really is the most obvious one, and it was actually recognized in antiquity. So that would be the first one. The next one I think might be the woman at the well. The woman at the well is a Maenad. She's alone and she's drawing water, and Jesus is going to give her opportunities to have living water. She says that she and her people worship at the mountain. The Maenads are worshiping in the mountain, and they're outside the city. It's a woman who's had multiple husbands, and the one she's living with is they're not married. And so it shows not only that Jesus is wise, but she's promiscuous. And so I think that really is quite clear. Another, probably the one that gets overlooked a lot, is the inaugural sermon at the very beginning. And people need to know something about the Bacchae to have this make sense, because it's not just a part of Dionysian religion. Dionysus appears on stage alone with the chorus in front of him, and he's speaking to the crowd, and he's saying that he's a son of Zeus, and he's taking the form of a mortal human being in order to punish Thebes for not recognizing his mother. Semele is actually his mother, and that Zeus was his father. And then he talks about Cadmus being the former king. His grandfather is being the only one who's really virtuous. And then he says that his relatives did not recognize him. And even his sister, his aunts, said that she had slept with somebody else, but it couldn't have been Zeus. And he was really angry about it. So
just so I have this right, you have their false allegations for the mother sleeping around, which is what we see in Gospel of John about Mary. And then also he came to his own, and his own received him not, and also didn't recognize him. So that's both the elements you're saying.
And that would be Jews did not receive him.
Right.
And but instead of coming to punish, he's giving gift after gift. He's the one who was from the lap of the Father. What other deity was born out of the lap of Zeus? It's Dionysus. And so what you have in the beginning of the gospel is the author is saying that Jesus is not only the Son of God, but a God. That he took the form of a human being. And he took the form of a human being to be a witness to people who would not recognize him, that is, Jews. And but instead of punishing them, he's going to give life after life, give life and gift after gift. And you also have the praise of Cadmus becomes the praise of John the Baptist. John the Baptist was the one person who got it right. And so then the reader knows, just as let me start again. The audience of the Bacchae knows who Dionysus is. that he's clowning around, pretending to be his own priest. And for the rest of the play, the audience can recognize something that people in the inside cannot. And so they get pleasure out of the dramatic ironies that Euripides put together. The same thing's true of the reader of the Gospel of John. You know right away who this guy is, even though other people can't recognize who he is. And so you have this irony that goes throughout the Gospel of John. I just think that is a brilliant move. And it's not a part of Dionysian religion unless that religion is attending to the Bacchae. Another place where this becomes, I'm going to give you the fourth example. The fourth example is the trial of Jesus in the Gospel of John and the trial of Dionysus before Pentheus. The trial of Jesus in John is different dramatically from the synoptics. And the scholar you mentioned that I hadn't heard about emphasizes that in chapters 18 and 19, you have just a plethora of similar motifs. What he didn't say, or at least you didn't quote him in saying, is these aren't just motifs. In some cases, the vocabulary is the same. That you can actually line the Greek up and say, this is what's going on. Now, the author isn't necessarily pulling the wool over your eyes. He's trying to say that Jesus's execution was as miserable a political judgment as Pentheus's was for Dionysus, and that somebody ought to pay the price for this abuse. And so I just think that is a glorious example. But another is this will be my fifth one, and we can go beyond that. Yeah. The raising of Lazarus from the dead. It actually it takes the form of a prison escape that Dionysus has in the Bacchae. You can have an earthquake. It opens up in the Bacchae. You have an earthquake. The god can escape. He is not going to escape. He's going to, in any case. And by the way, the Gospel Luke has the same story as another imitation. So those are five that I think are worthwhile. Some less ones. People try to arrest Jesus and he escapes their hands and they can't do anything about it. Dionysus does that frequently. So those are a few.
If I could add some here, you've got water into wine. That one is huge.
Oh, yeah. How could I miss that one?
I don't know how you forgot that one.
The true grapevine. Yeah, that would be probably number one.
Yeah, I mean, it's so obvious. And the fact that in the prior versions of these were real festivals that were celebrated each year at a certain time. By the way, Dennis, did I ever feel, I know me and Neil gave you a phone call. We chatted a little bit about the research that we had done. We found some scholars in German that I had to get translated using AI to try and understand what they're saying, because I can't speak or read German, that have already noticed this in the early 19th and even 20th centuries, started identifying some of this stuff. But what I found interesting in what you've pointed out, and then I went to Bultmann and noticed it in his commentary on John, and then you really nail it. And then there were German scholars who highlighted this, that when you get into the Common Era, post-Christianity, we know that there's exchange happening, there's competition happening. What happens is in the Panarion, Epiphanius' Panarion, he highlights this interesting day, the 11th of Tebe, which just so happens to be the nones of Janus, the night of January the 5th into the 6th. that the Christians and pagans celebrate. They calls them heathens in our English translations. They celebrate the birth of this god named Ion, Dusaris, and Petra. And I can't remember the third deity, but they're like kind of interchangeable, same thing. But they went into an underground chamber on the night of the 5th with candlelight, in the darkness, but then they had candle procession. And then the morning of course, they escaped this underground temple that is a temple of the Virgin Cori. Okay. Cori being obviously another mother of Dionysus. Well, when you go back to Basilides, there's a primary source that Clement mentions about this Christian named Basilides, and he says that the birth of Christ, this Basilidean cult, says the birth of Christ happened on the 6th of January, the night to the morning of the 6th of January. And I thought, oh, wow, isn't it interesting today, Eastern Orthodox Christians celebrate not only the water into wine, the Cana episode, the baptism, but also the birth. And they just think the birth and baptism were like 30 years apart. So all three are celebrated on the very same day. Well, go back a little further. Pliny the Elder mentions that there was a day, the 11th of Tebe, it is the 5th to 6th of January, that the epiphany of Dionysus happens, and that the water inside the temple, the spring or well, tastes like wine during this week. And it starts at the same time of the year, the very same day that they later celebrate the birth and baptism and whatnot of Jesus. And I thought, there's too much going on here to dismiss what's going on. But the example, and I've rambled a lot, I want to get your thoughts, is that there was a priest that would appear at a certain time of the festival each year. They would open up the temple, show you that there were 3 bronze cauldrons completely empty, check the walls. The way that they wrote it was like they checked to see there was no artifice. There's no secret, they're trying to pull one over on you. And they lock the door in front of the whole city and no one can get in. The next day they go in, the 3 empty cauldrons are full of wine. Now there's no water in them. Okay. But they're empty, and then they're full of wine the next morning as a miraculous gift that the presence, or another way of saying it, that the epiphany of Dionysus, he has shown up. He has made himself present among them, and this is why the wine miracle took place. I think that's so obvious, and then add to that the true vine, everyone knew Dionysus was the vine. He was the blood. He was the grape. And Jesus is said to be the true vine. Anyway, comments on that?
Yeah, well, one thing to add is in the miracle of turning water into wine, the people are already drunk.
Good point.
And it's at a wedding. In other words, you're celebrating sex. Now, I'm going to compare that with the synoptics. What happens to Jesus's first miracle in Mark and from then on Matthew and Luke? Jesus goes into a synagogue and he preaches and he casts out a demon. Now, which way is a better way to start your mission? Getting people drunk at a wedding, or you're dealing with demons in a synagogue? I think that is an intentional change. Again, it's to alert the reader you're going to be in the presence of a guy who has a good time.
You were the first person who brought it to my attention that they were drunk. So I was always reading this as a Christian growing up going, well, they had plenty to drink already. I never thought Jesus decides to do the miracle at a time when they're already plastered. They've already...
And the new wine is better than what anybody knows.
Exactly.
So he's better than Dionysus. This is a syncresis. It shows that Jesus is better than Dionysus.
I was going to also mention, when you brought up the woman at the well, you implied it, but a lot of people who haven't read your book and may not be able to afford it, and Dr. MacDonald doesn't have control over the prices of his works. But if you're looking for a book that Dennis has, a huge amount of his work, including a lot of this stuff, you can get it very affordable. It's massive. You can't. This is like a tool. This isn't just a book you read like from front to back. This is a tool that you constantly reference, and it's called Synopses of Epic Tragedy in the Gospels. Volumes 1, 2, and 3 are in here. He covers some of this stuff. What I would say is this too, though. You brought up the woman at the well who's promiscuous, and in the Bacchae, people might go, Maenad's promiscuous? There's a statement by Pentheus who accuses these women who go out into the wilderness. They're going out to the mountain in the away from the city, of sleeping in other men's beds. Now, it may be a false allegation, but there is this implication that they are, promiscuous, and that the promiscuity appears at the woman at the well too. And I kind of wondered, to get your thoughts, the life-giving water. I know Dionysus, the Maenads are able to produce, through Dionysus, of course, water, honey, and milk, I believe, from the ground in Euripides. Now, in John, is there a correlation there?
The first thing I would say is that it's a false claim, but one of the characters says, don't blame, yes, the women may be having sex, but don't blame the wine. So the God isn't responsible for that. The women are on their own. The other thing to recognize, though, is that there are two primary Olympian donor deities, that is, gods who are primarily there to provide. And Demeter and Persephone, her daughter, are responsible for grains. And Dionysus is responsible for liquids. So that's why you have Dionysus related to honey, to wine, to water. I didn't know about milk, but he's a donor deity of liquids. Mm-hmm. And Demeter and Persephone are the deities for grains. And those are the two elements of life that are life-sustaining. You have a similar dichotomy between Zeus, who's responsible for the clouds and thunder and rain, and Demeter, who's responsible for the earth, Gaia, and so on.
Yeah. Okay. Before we continue, I've got examples from your book we can get into and continue this overlap. We have some more questions from our audience, and Dennis MacDonald really appreciates the questions, everybody. Gaddis, thank you so much for the super chat. Myths as high-frequency oral traditions adapted to society and showcase of values. Myths as world models should give fundamental truths and be adaptable.
So you have two definitions of myths here, and I'm going to try to see what the difference is. One would be myths of oral traditions and myths as world models. Oh, I think I know what you're after. Some myths can be understood as universal kinds of stories. So that this would include creation stories, for example. And there are three recognized models of myths. One is the cosmogonic myth, that is, how did the world come into being? And those would be world models. There are other models that are etiological models. Etiological myths. Etiological myths are stories that are related to particular practices and rituals, such as Dionysian worship or baptism or whatever. There are other kinds that are called founding myths. And those are the myths that are most congenial to what's going on in the New Testament. The myths are there to create a narrative for social groups. So that's what you have as oral traditions, I suppose, adapted to society and showcase of values. So I think what you're after, Gaddis, is the founding myth. So you have founding myths for social groups. You have cosmological myths for the world myths, and you have etiological myths for particular rites or conventions or myth or rituals. So I hope that's helpful. But that's the best I can do in kind of parsing out the various myths that you talk about. But I would say this: I think that your question is terrific, because it identifies the differences between myths. And it's not, mimesis isn't playing a role. It's rather the way that social groups function to explain the world they live in, the society they live in, and the rituals that they preserve.
Thank you, Gaddis. Eshai Taylor, thank you for the super chat. Hypothetically from Israel, I think that's an Israel flag. Revival of Baal cult, Christian revival.
Illinois, maybe. What do you think?
Huh?
Is it Illinois, maybe? Hypothetically from, or
no, Israel. Israel.
Oh, yes. Is it? Okay.
It looks like an Israel flag, and then it has a cross after that, eyeballs, and the cross. Revival of Baal cult.
No, Baal's not there. Yeah.
It sounds like an online thing, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of stuff that goes on online. I don't know, Ishai. I would be cautious about Baal being, any other, I don't know, any religion that's trying to revive this idea. I have a very hard time believing that that's what's going on. Bakken, thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate it, and for being a member again. I think this is the fourth one, something like that. Dehydrated grapes lining the vat. Also, Cana. Carl Ruck talked about wines being infused with herbs and spices to cause intoxication.
I've actually talked with Carl Ruck, I think maybe on one of your channels, but on somebody's channel. And I think one has to be cautious about some of his judgments, but you have to be cautious about mine as well. So I'll just tell you what my misgivings might be. I think that there's no doubt that people added things to wine. We know about honey-sweetened wine in the Iliad. We know of wine mixed with myrrh in the Gospels. We know that in Dionysian religion, you had perhaps ivy or heather as intoxicants. And the one reason we know that would happen is that the Greeks generally diluted their wine with 2/3 water and 1/3 wine. To get intoxicated with that mixture, you have to drink an awful lot of wine. But if you can add to it some intoxicants, and these are called pharmaca, where we get the word pharmacology. If you can add pharmaca to them, you get a high. The same thing happened in ancient beers when you would try to increase the intoxication. By the way, in wine or mental drugs that enhance one's mentality are ubiquitous in religion and almost ubiquitous in cultures. So yes, there must have been intoxication and spices and herbs added to wine. How widespread that was, we don't know. How much that's because they wanted to be intoxicated or they wanted to change the flavor of the wine, which no doubt was not as refined as we know it. I don't know. But I think the idea of intoxication in the wine and wine in rituals is overreach. But we certainly can expect it in Dionysian religion because altered states were important in the Dionysian religion as they were in the Eleusinian mysteries. So yes, there's something to be said. I wouldn't doubt at all. In fact, I would affirm that there were intoxicants that were added to wine and beer. By the way, we had no distilled alcohol at the time. But the how important that was in religious experience or in social manipulation, I'm much more cautious about.
Let me ask you this before we move on to the next one. There are lots of people who look at other cults like the Dionysian one, the Bacchic cult, and they see practices like ritual, ceremonial drinking and eating of the god, or initiatory type of things we might find in Christianity. And a lot of them, associated with the circles that run around Amon Hillman. Okay. I'm only bringing his name up. He's like Beetlejuice. You say it, and God knows every little troll on the planet comes creeping up in the comment section, and then he's got to make a video, and then it's like it never ends. Dennis, you don't see all this stuff. I get to see it. But they have this kind of like pattern recognition where they think if I could find it in enough of these Greco-Roman cults, then it may not spell it out obvious and clear for you in the New Testament, but therefore the Christians are doing it as well. So then they read into things that we find in the New Testament that they find, and I'm not saying that's what Bachan's doing. I'm just saying, a lot of people who are like following the online crowd of these people, they just try to like see the overlap and they go, oh, there's commonality between cults. Therefore, Christians are doing what these other cults might do. And some of that practice, of course, we would say is horrendous today. We'd look at it and go, okay, that's totally immoral, obviously.
I'm familiar with his positions, and I think they're worse than nonsense. I really think there's very little justification philologically. And one reason is that in so many places where people see cultural exchange and similarities, there's not disciplined understanding of how to make sure that you have a connection between one thing and another. I mentioned this earlier with folklore, that you can see similarities, but the issue is that you can see similarities to things that are not actually similar, because the mind is interested in assembling similarities to make judgments. So I think the first thing to say is I would love to know whether Hillman and others and Ruck have sufficient, they can have examples, but I'm interested in the discipline of methodology and criteria to determine whether you really are manufacturing similarities that in cultures are really not there.
Yeah. And I wasn't doing that to, I was reminded of it because the topic gets brought up in circles online that are associated with Amon Hillman. Ruck, of course, is identifying, he believes, intoxication or hallucinogenic type stuff in a lot of different various forms of cultic practices in literature. And I think people take that way further than Ruck ever did and run with kind of extreme parallels and things like that, or even going further than that. And that is the idea of like children, actively using children in sexual rights and things like that. So then they apply that to the New Testament. And I'm trying to point out, that's why I was bringing that up, because I wanted your thoughts about if someone sees behaviors in other cults, you don't jump to Christianity and go, they did the same thing, unless it explicitly spells out that's what they're doing. And I think that happens a lot. So anyway, that was what I wanted to bring up.
Well, and I'm glad you went back to Ruck. Ruck has evidence for that practice. There's no question about it. Yeah. So you have, and so the criterion at that point would be almost universal accessibility and examples. So if you have enough of them, let's go with it.
Yeah. Thank you, Bachan, for the super duper. Appreciate it. Next is Victor Engelman. Appreciate that super chat. The pool of Bethesda was in an Asclepion.
Yes, that's a very interesting observation, and it's been known for some time. And it's right outside of Jerusalem, and it's presumably a part of an alternative or an ancillary form of Judaism. So yeah, that's what it is. Now, of course, to understand an Asclepion, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the god who is troubling the waters. Asclepius is simply a deity identified with health and medicine, and his sons are there. So an Asclepion could be kind of a spa. But of course, you have the troubling of the waters, and Jesus is the one who's responsible for the cure. So, but you're exactly right. And it's, by the way, it has 5 porticos, and that doesn't mean it's in the form of a pentagon. It means that it probably has a dividing wall. And we have other examples of divided pools in ancient health spas.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Victor. Our next one is the universe was vomited into being by Mbambo. Thank you, Victor. Appreciate the super chat.
Well, I would say that about the White House. I'm not sure I'd say it about the universe.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that super chat. That's a good one. Gaddis, again, thank you, Gaddis. What do you think gives longevity? Social-like myths equal makes it common, well-known and active. World myths adapt new characters' names over time, but structure holds.
I'm going to try to make sense of what you mean, and if I don't, you can give a free chat. If you mean by structure, do myths fall into patterns? And they certainly do. And I talked about the 3 kinds of myths that folklorists recognize: the cosmological, the ideological, and the founding. But myths are not items that are floating around the earth. They are products of human imagination, usually or often in social groups. So that's why social identity is so important. And you can talk about monomyths the same way that Joseph Campbell does. But I think it's better to talk about myths as the way folklorists do. That is, that people in Germany are going to have stories that are similar to those in France, but they are different because they are supporting different language issues, different cultural issues, and myth making is not just about the support and identity of a social group. It's a way of distinguishing one group from another. So the idea of universal myths is problematic for folklorists who understand these myths to be establishing social identities and differences.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Gaddis. Look, I've got you've covered. Let me just point out what you've covered. You've covered a lot of the big ones. So I'm going to read. Let me just share my screen so people can see this. I'm going to read what you have as outlines for what you cover in your book. The origin of the Logos, which we talked about. John the Faithful Witness. The rejection of the Logos. He came to his own. They did not receive him. This is all in the Bacchae as well for Dionysus. The one in the lap of the Father. The Logos assumes a human body. That's another. The Son of God with many names. Changing water into wine. Avenging the Father's house. An old man seeks rejuvenation. That's an important one. The Son of God must increase. That one, I've seen others highlight this one too. I believe the Son of God must increase. I think you covered that. The Greek is very similar to what's in the Bible too. Yeah. The donor of living water, we covered. The healing of the royal official's son. I don't think we covered that. An old cripple man, or old cripple walks again. We did eating of the flesh of the Son of God. Jesus escapes arrest, interrogating the Son of God. The true liberator. The escape artist. The blind seer. The love of God, or the love God. The life giver. The God fighters. That's an important one. Over and over in Dionysian literature, all the way back in Hesiod, you get a mention, I believe it's in Hesiod, for sure in the hymn to Dionysus. Theomachoi come up all over the place in that literature. The cult of Dionysus is always persecuted, always encountering some type of persecution, and that Greek term comes up. We find that being used by Gamaliel in Acts 5. But it also seems to appear in John.
Yeah.
So that's one most people don't know about. The God fighters. The true grapevine we covered. Arresting the Son of God. Interrogating the Son of God again. Violent death and attending women. A woman's recognition. Exit stage. Postscript. So is there anything that we just read there that you realize, oh, that was one I didn't cover that really should be nailed, or you think you've covered them, the main ones?
Well, I think the Theomachus is important because Pentheus's crime is that he's making war with the god, and the Greek is the same as the word Theomachus that appears in the New Testament. The other one that's amazing, but it's a bit complex, but I'll tell you what is really fun. Mary Magdalene recognizes Jesus only after he names her. So she's in the garden. Jesus has been raised. There are no men watching the resurrection, and she can't recognize him. And then she thinks he's a gardener, and she says, well, my Lord is dead, and they've taken his body, and I don't know where it is. Where is it? Pu estin. And so then Jesus says to her, Mary, and she recognizes that it's her Kyrios, it's her Lord. And so it's an astonishing revelation. And then she goes off and she tells the boys that Jesus has been raised from the dead. So what happens with agave at the end of the Bacchae? This is agave is Dionysus's mother, Pentheus's mother. So agave and the other Maenads have beheaded Pentheus in the woods, and she has put her son's head on a thyrsus, a cane, and brought it into Thebes, and she thinks it's the head of a lion, and she wants to show people how brave she was. Then she is asking her father Cadmus, hey, Pu estin, where is my son's body? And his son's body is not around. Yeah, there you have Pentheus right there. And finally, she recognizes that she's killed her own son, and she asks again, where is the body of my son? And Cadmus produces it, and so puts the body together. Now, this is a story of enduring tragedy. Pentheus dies, and he's not going to get up again, and he's not going to rise from the dead. And the recognition of his mother is he's dead and she killed him. The end of the Gospel of John is about this woman who loves her Lord. She can't find him. She has a recognition of it. And the recognition is not one of death, but it's of life. Now there you have your syncresis. I think that is a brilliant solution to why Mary Magdalene is at the grave and how the gospel ends. It ends strongly with the Dionysian story, the same way that it began.
That's so powerful. We're going to look at Mark W.G. Stibbe stuff too to complement what you said today. We'll just read from his work in a minute. But we have a super chat. Bakken is back. Thank you, Bakken. Dionyso, god of wine, perhaps one of the oldest epithet of a religion with a state-altering substance. With trade, did his rites travel the whole world?
Whoa, you know so much more about that stuff than I don't dare. Do you have something about that?
I would say, I mean, I don't know for sure about whether or not these rites travel the whole world. I think that you're going to get geography and agriculture and people who have wine and whatnot in various locations. Nisam Amzolog thinks that Yahweh actually traveled to the Aegean in the Bronze Age, and that somehow that infiltrated within the Aegean region, and this is where he thinks Dionysus and Yahweh actually parallel. Later authors, of course, see the parallels in the Jerusalem temple when they, like later Roman authors and Greek authors are saying, hold on, we see the parallels with their practice and their rituals in their temple to what we find in Dionysian worship. But is that anachronistic? Is it late and they're assuming it went back? I don't know. But the idea that this, I don't know enough. I need to talk to some classicists to see how far did the Dionysus or Dionyso, because that's, I believe, the Bronze Age inscription that we have in Linear B is Dionyso, and it's associated with wine offerings. Yeah, that name is associated with wine in the 13th century BCE.
I didn't know that. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So as far as how far it travels, I don't know the answer to that question, but I bet it traveled some. I mean, it's kind of a big deal, you know. Wine is a big deal. Old men become young when they drink, huh? Anyway, thank you so much, Bakken. I hope that my answer was sufficient. I have Mark W.G. Stibbe here. Here it is. Oh, that's Nissan Momsalog. If you're interested in like the Dionysian Yahweh stuff, it's an article. Was Yahweh worshipped in the Aegean? Go Google that and you'll find it. So this is what Stibbe says. And cut me off anytime you want and feel like commenting, but I feel like this is important. A lot of people are learning about this, and I think it's interesting. Whether or not we agree with Fortna's description of the wine miracle as legendary, it is, after all, possible that the miracle is historical and that the storyteller, mind you, he's a believer, which is fine, whatever. But he says the storyteller has given it a Dionysiac resonance. It is significant that Dionysiac echoes have been noticed throughout centuries of the fourth gospel research. The identification of these parallels underlies the legitimacy of mapping John's gospel against our paradigm of tragic story. He, by the way, above this, Dennis, he just goes on and on and on, explaining why it looks like John is a tragedy. Tragedies don't always end on a bad note. They oftentimes end on a good note, and he gives examples of that. So he says, however, further evidence is needed for regarding John as tragic performance. This evidence can be found in the parallels between John's gospel and the Bacchae. What we therefore need to do now is look at the Euripidean revision of the Dionysiac myth in more detail in order to trace the possible influence of Dionysiac poetics on John's storytelling. The story of the Bacchae proceeds as follows. At the beginning of the play, the god Dionysus enters and speaks the prologue. He describes himself in the first line as the son of Zeus, the father of the gods. He explains his presence thus: I have come back to Thebes, the land where I was born, and here I stand, a god incognito, disguised as a man. We learn from this prologue that Dionysus is divine because his father is the father of the gods. But we also learn that his mother was human, Semele, and that her tomb is outside the royal palace of Thebes. Dionysus has come to the city because Semele's sisters, who are still alive, are slandering her and suggesting that Dionysus is not divine, is not the son of Zeus. Only Semele's father, Cadmus, has protected Dionysus's name by honoring Semele's tomb. Dionysus therefore returns to his home city, strikes Semele's sisters into a wild frenzy, and begins the task of revealing himself to mortal eyes as the god Semele bore to Zeus. The principal antagonist of Dionysus is introduced at the end of the prologue. He is Pentheus, the new king of Thebes and the grandson of Cadmus. Dionysus claims that this unbelieving Pentheus revolts against divinity, theomakoi, the sin of hubris, because he neglects true worship of Dionysus. When this same Pentheus enters the scene, it is to criticize the obscene disorder which Dionysiac worship is producing and to slander Dionysus as a charlatan magician. Seeing Cadmus and the blind Tiresias in their Dionysiac costumes, he mocks them too. Tiresias rebukes Pentheus with a warning. Dionysus, the son of Semele, is the supreme blessing of mankind because he is the inventor of the wine that bears away the suffering of mankind. He is the provider of the true medicine for misery. The worship of Dionysus is therefore to be encouraged because it is through Dionysus' intercession before Zeus that his followers may win the favor of heaven. This is all like really, really interesting to like pay attention to. Tiresias warns Pentheus not to mock Dionysus, not to flout the will of heaven by suggesting that Dionysus is not a son of Zeus. Cadmus urges Pentheus to agree. If Dionysus is not divine, then the fiction is a noble one because it confers honor on Cadmus and Pentheus' family. Pentheus, however, does not hear the warning, not even the warning of a terrible revenge by Dionysus, such as Actaeon received because of his blasphemy against Artemis. Pentheus dismisses the two old men, charging them not to contaminate him with their madness. Pentheus, furious at the gullibility of his grandfather and of the blind prophet, commands his attendants to arrest the effeminate stranger, the disguised Dionysus, who has duped the old men. Dionysus voluntarily accepts arrest and is brought before Pentheus. There follows an acerbic and sticomythic exchange, which results in Pentheus incarcerating Dionysus in a dark prison inside his palace. However, Pentheus has underestimated his adversary, and his palace is soon in ruins, destroyed by a great earthquake, out of which Dionysus walks unscathed. At this point, a messenger enters and describes the orgy of indulgence and frenetic activity which Pentheus' mother, Agave, and her sisters are enjoying outside the city on the hills. Pentheus, eager to put a stop to such embarrassing frenzies, decides to take an army and rout the women. Dionysus persuades him, however, that it would be more interesting to go there in disguise and observe the full splendor of the Bacchic party in order to be even more inconspicuous. Dionysus persuades Pentheus to wear women's clothes, and off he goes to the hills. When there, Dionysus tells him that he would have a better view up in a tree. Pentheus agrees, is hoisted up into a fir tree, seen by the women and torn to pieces. His mother, Agave, takes his head back to Thebes, thinking that it was a lion when she and her women butchered. Before long, the women awake from their madness, and Agave sees the full extent of their awful murder. Dionysus metes out severe penalties on them all, and his powerful divinity is reestablished. Looking more closely at Euripides' revision of the Dionysiac myth, we can see how it fits into our deep structure of tragic story introduced at the end of the last section. Indeed, the Bacchae is an interesting manifestation of the paradigm of tragic story. It is a story which focuses on the murder of a king and which conforms to the paradigmatic sequence of purpose, passion, perception. It begins with the introduction of a divine protagonist, Dionysus, and with the overt statement of a purpose, namely Dionysus' task of making certain members of the Theban royal family recognize his divinity. It proceeds to the introduction of the antagonist, the unbelieving Pentheus, who establishes a purpose directly in opposition to Dionysus's. That is, to disprove Dionysus's divinity, even though they are members of the same family, and to quash the Bacchic uprising in his land. Pentheus' purpose is to direct cause of his hamartia, or agnoia, his inability to acknowledge Dionysus as the son of Zeus. All right, so let me skip down here. This is what he says in his summary. So from his summary, we can detect some broad similarities with the story of Jesus in John's gospel. 1, the prologue of both stories concentrates upon the same theme. A divine being goes to his home, but is rejected by members of his family. In Jesus' case, his earthly and his spiritual family. 2, In both stories, the protagonist is an unrecognized deity, a stranger from heaven who faces intense hostility and unbelief from the ruling party of the city. Thebes in one and Jerusalem in the other. 3. In both stories, the goal of the deity is basically philanthropic, for it in Dionysus' desire to share the wine that alleviates man's sufferings, whilst it is Jesus' desire that man should drink of his life-giving blood. John 2, where the wine has been seen as a Dionysiac symbol, and John 6, where the blood of Jesus arguably points to the wine of the Eucharist. 4. In both stories, the tragic hamartia consists of the antagonist's failure to recognize one who is really a member of the same family. In the Bacchae, Pentheus' grandfather Cadmus is the father of Semele, making Pentheus and Dionysus, in some sense or other, brothers. In John, both the Jews, the antagonist, and Jesus, the protagonist, share the same father in heaven. If you could take it that way, or they're both from the same genealogy, being Jews, making them in a spiritual sense brothers, though the protagonist's filial relationship is unique and fulfilled, whilst that of the Jews is shared and unfulfilled. 5. In both stories, the pathos consists of the victim being dressed up in humiliating garb, led out of the city to an accursed hill, hoisted up onto a tree, then killed. So that's, to me, that's fascinating that Jesus dies upon a cross or a tree. Acts calls it a tree. Like, it uses the exact word of him dying on a tree. And of course, Pentheus, a king, also dies on a tree. In both stories, women fulfill the role of true worshipers of the visiting deity. 7. In both stories, the Theomachus, the enemies of the deity, attempt to stone the god. 8. In both stories, the deity is ambiguous and elusive, often speaking and acting in such a way as to escape definition and capture. 9. In both stories, the place of the city is important as a symbol of institutionalized religion and the loss of the immediacy of belief. 10. In both stories, the divine stranger has how do you pronounce that?
Thaumaturgical powers.
Yeah, thaumaturgic powers. And then 11, in both stories, the tragic action is not centered upon the person. The Bacchae is not called Dionysus, nor is it called Pentheus, even though both titles would have been possible given the prominence of these protagonists. In John's story, too, the tragic action centers not only on Jesus, but also on the Jews and on Pilate. So there's so much here. It says that he says it's not possible here to explore each of these parallel in detail in order to highlight both the differences and similarities. But I think he's onto something here, Dennis. And I wanted to take the time to read it for the first time on the internet with you present. Any comments before we get to our next super chat?
I thought it was very well summarized. I think there were more parallels he could have brought to bear, but he certainly brought, and there were some that were thinner. But I thought it was I think it was a good presentation. I want to step back and make a methodological contribution or assessment. And this is, I guess, a request to the readers. When one sees so many similarities between two texts, mythological texts, some people would say that similarities do not represent connections, that people can make connections on lots of different things. And that's why mimesis is important. Mm-hmm. So when I'll go through the examples.
Are you talking about your criteria, this right here?
The criteria. So for the author of the Gospel of John and his readers, was the Bacchae accessible? Answer, yes. It was one of the most famous tragedies that are still being performed in the Roman Empire, and we know that they were performed. Do we have analogy? That is, were other people also interested in imitating the Bacchae? And this is where Courtney Friesen has been so important, because it was done so by Jews and Christians, and by the way, not with the same density, which is the third one. What you read, Derek, shows that you have density of parallels. They often appear in the same sequence or order. Some of them are so distinctive, even with vocabulary, that they just pop out at you. Then's the interpretability. That's the syncresis. And in some cases, the author that you mentioned shows that the syncresis is similar. Jesus too can offer eternal life by drinking his blood. Jesus too can escape prisons. But also its syncresis can be competitive. At the end of the gospel, Jesus is a lot cooler than Dionysus, who kills Pentheus and sends Pentheus's mother away. Then you have ancient recognition. Already Clement of Alexandria saw these similarities, and so did Nonus of Panopolis, and so did Justin Martyr. So you have all of these criteria. Now, I wish the author had gone back to the parallels he cited and to justify them with a methodology.
Right.
This is another example where criteria is so important in comparing two texts to each other. And let me do a little advertisement for my work. My work always uses criteria that are either those or some other ones that deal with comparisons, because you need to have that kind of muscle in order to defend the relationship of one text to another. So what we find in the Gospel of John and the Bacchae is not unique. It appears all over the New Testament, including the Acts of the Apostles, where almost every major narrative has a parallel in Greek poetry or philosophy. So I think what is missing too often in the discussion of comparative mythology is criteria. And so I think you could overlay the criteria of mimesis criticism to what you just read, and that would actually add muscle to what he's presenting.
Yeah, I think you're right. Again, I loved the parallels that he brings up. I think he's onto something with it.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not being critical.
Yeah, love it. I hope people will check that out. If you're looking for that book, it's called John as Storyteller. It's primarily about genre of what John is doing. So it's more about like what the Gospel of John is as a tragedy. It's in the genre of tragedy. He goes through romance and all that kind of different topics and the debates of different scholars who tried to pigeonhole John into a certain category, but then he highlights that tragedy makes the best sense, and then he gives these parallels, and I think it's really interesting. Couple more super chats, and then Dennis, I'll let you go. I really appreciate your time. It's been fantastic. Anti-Contrarian 3788, thank you for the super chat, my friend. New Testament authors referencing Dionysus in the origin story of Christ. Christ is from Galilee and Dionysus being from southern Phoenicia in the hymns.
That's an interesting question. I'm going to give you a simple answer. I don't think the issue is geographical. I don't think we can worry about Galilee or Phoenicia. I think, though, we can talk about this image of being the unique Son of God, the monogenes, and from the lap of the Father, which is Dionysian, that you have a special bonding between Dionysus and Zeus, because Zeus is both Dionysus's father and mother. I guess that's about as close as I could get. The infancy narrative in the Gospel of Luke is not Dionysian. It's primarily related to the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite, the mother of Aeneas. And that's in several of my books, including the one that is coming out fairly soon. So, but I think the issue of the origin stories is fascinating. Matthew is different altogether because it's so informed by biblical texts and maybe mythologies of Alexander the Great.
So I would just make this comment. I think the super chatter is highlighting something that's interesting, at least, and even if this doesn't prove anything, Scythopolis is like 18 miles from Nazareth, and that place was well known for a burial location that, according to some of the stories, that Dionysus buried one of the nymphs who helped nurse him as a child, and it's only 18 miles. I mean, we're talking about the same backyard. The Ptolemies, they were all about Dionysus. They ruled this region. They really flowered, I think, Dionysus worship among the Jews in this region. So I do think geography can be significant.
Yeah, I now agree with you. That's a very good observation. Yeah.
Yeah, it just doesn't prove. I can't prove just because the geographic location, because here's the other problem. Like, you could make a case, don't get me wrong. I can't, I'm not aware of enough in order to make that. But you even have Pan, right? There's a temple that was built.
Right, there is, yeah.
Yeah, right there at the in the northern Galilee region, Jesus is located. Yeah, yep. And what's interesting about that is when you go to that spot, there's a portal to the underworld, a spring, and there's all these gods, and it's the same location. Jesus asks, "Who do men say that I am?" So I kind of wonder if there's a play there somehow in terms of they know something about this geography, and so they're crafting a narrative. Like there's all these sons of gods, including the Caesar and Pan and all these. I don't know. Speculation, but it is interesting, the question to ask that, because
I think so too. Yeah.
Even in the older Homeric hymn to Dionysus, he's supposedly from the region of the Dead Sea. In one of his origin stories, he's from the sea that has no life. And it's in the eastern board. And in fact, the pirates who are going to try and get booty from his family are taking Dionysus on that ship, heading east in the Mediterranean to try and go along the coast to find his family to get booty. And of course, that's when he transforms the ship into a massive vineyard and turns them into dolphins and all that cool stuff. But I think that's important to just consider. Is we're dealing with the same kind of area of the world. So for the simple fact that in your criteria of did they have access to these stories in a mimetic sense, even a geographic mimetic sense, it's not like we're asking Dionysus, who's all the way in China, to have somehow influenced us all the way over here in the Mediterranean. No. They're cousins. They're right there back to back in the same regions. And I think that's important.
Yeah, one could add, though, that the Homeric hymn to Dionysus was the model that Luke used for Jesus calling fishermen to follow him. There's no doubt about it. The parallels are verbal, they're sequential, they hit all the criteria.
I've never looked at that.
Yeah, so Peter recognizes that he's a sinful man. You have a miracle of fish, that are so many it's like having so much too many grapes on your ship, and so on. And here's the kicker: the pirates turn into dolphins.
Yeah.
Jesus turns fishermen into fishers for people.
Right.
It's a reversal of the image. One is people become dolphins. The other is these humans are going to fish for the dolphins.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, that is. Two more here. Anti-contrarian, thank you so much. Why is the etymological origin of Dionysus such a mystery in Linear B? Diwo presumably means god of. So then what is Nuso? Who would know this? Not me. I've just read in an article, it's Googling it, and searched and found that scholars have found that while that name may be a mysterious word, they don't really know what the name itself is, that these inscriptions were associated with wine offerings. So they saw a correlation there that wine offerings and the name were situated, couched in the same kind of earthly material, whether that means they found potsherds that, are associated with the name. And they said, hold on, there's some kind of connection to Dionysus, Dionysus, and wine. I don't know.
That's a brilliant question. I don't have an answer to it, but it's a brilliant question.
It really is. Great question. And then one more by Anti-Contrarian. Again, thank you so much for the support. Could modern nautical rites involving alcohol and drunkenness go back to Dionysus veneration and wine in ancient seafaring cults of the Bronze Age?
It's hard for me to see the connection, but give me one more second here.
I would, by the way, the only thing I can think of is Samothrace, the Samothrace mystery cult, which was very much seafaring, but it'd be impressive to see how this relates to Dionysus on the ships, It could. I mean, you're talking about, right? You're talking about pirates on a ship capturing him, and then the ship turning into a big vineyard. I don't know.
Well, you have that. I wonder what it would mean to store wine on a ship, and I just don't know anything about it, honestly.
Yeah,
but it's another good question.
It is a good question, especially with the imagery of the hymn to Dionysus. Thank you so much, Auntie. And the last one, Victor, thanks for the last second super chat. Dionysus pi root swa, also Shiva. How about Jiwa? I don't know. Yeah. I don't know, Victor. You're hitting me with a blank. I've got a blank on this one.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Obviously, your last publication, Feuding Gospel Authors, where you have this hypothetical discussion going on between these epistolary fiction letters, writing between each author of the Gospels and Acts. Why did you do this? What's going on? Some of them were like, that was beautiful and brilliant, but why did you? I loved this book to help people wrap their minds around. A lot of the Dionysus stuff comes up. So if you're into Dionysus, or if you're not, it goes into a lot of other stuff as well. But this is engaging the synoptic problem in a unique way no one has ever done, where they what Dennis has done, and I'm trying to stillman it now, Dennis. Correct me if I'm wrong. All of the insights he's learned from source criticism, from textual criticism, from the synoptic problem, from mimesis criticism, everything that you've learned, you've tried to write into a very digestible, entertaining letter format conversation where the audience is reading as if a letter from Mark is written to Matthew and Matthew to Mark, and Matthew's going, why did you say that about the disciples? You made them look dumb, or vice versa. And it's like an intelligent, scholarly way of breaking down what you think about how the Gospels oppose and connect. And of course, I think this is amazing. Your next book, if you want to comment on that, and then tell us about your next book.
Well, about that book, it was so much fun to write, for one thing. It's over 100 letters that they write to each other, and they all have different personalities and social identities. So those differences come to bear. So Matthew, the strict rabbi Christian, is very different from Luke, who's the bon vivant of Eastern Asia, and so on. He's got his own projects and so on. Thank you for that. The book I'm working on now is called Excavating the Gospels for Homeric Footprints. and it's dedicated exclusively to the synoptic problem. In fact, the subtitle is How Mimesis Solved the Synoptic Problem in Q. The Q document already has imitations of the Odyssey. And nobody has seen that. And I have not emphasized it in my earlier books. But this one, I think, is really decisive on the synoptic problem and should be able to answer Q critics and the critics of Homer. So there are only two places in the synoptic tradition where you find either no or very little Homeric influence, Matthew and Papias. But already in Q, or the Logoi of Jesus, you find imitations of Homer. And in fact, it occurs at the very beginning of the Q document. Mm-hmm. Jesus' birth until he gets his acquisition of disciples. It's Telemachus being empowered and finally getting a crew to go to Pylos. It's really wonderful stuff. I feel so privileged to spend a career in trying to mine these things, and this book will be my end. I turned 80 in 3 months.
Wow.
And I don't have the energy or the library to continue it. So, but I think it's going to be honestly groundbreaking. And I'm hoping it becomes the solution to the synoptic problem for many people.
Dennis, I can't wait for the book. I honor your work. I love what you do. I hope your legacy continues to make impacts and changes. And we at MythVision are going to continue to obviously promote it to show people. We did have one more person pop in. Last one says, God of forgetting, Nuso, Nisa, Nisia, amnesia. Anti-contrarian, thank you.
Oh, that's because I'm getting old. The God of forgetting is getting closer and closer to me.
Oh, like I love how they like etymologically like started to slip into amnesia. You know what I mean? Oh man, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I don't know. I need a philologist who's like really tracking that to even see if there's something to it. Obviously you are a philologist, but I'm saying this is linear B. We're talking prior to Homeric Greek, like way older.
That's not what I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Anti-contrarian, thank you so much for that super chat. Appreciate that. Dennis MacDonald, Dionysus in the flesh, recognize the deity, ladies and gentlemen. You don't want his wrath. I'm always reminded, Dennis, of your book. Bear with me. Your book. Here it is. Mythologizing Jesus. Okay. I remember reading this and getting to the end of it. It's not a long read. It's an easy read. Getting to the end of it, and you were talking to your grandchild, and you said, so did you like the story? You know, you were telling them the stories of the Greek myths, and I can't remember which one exactly. And then you said, okay, you know both stories now. You know Jesus and you know the Greek myths. Which one do you like better? And they're like, oh, I like the Greek ones way better. And they're like, yeah. But which one should you act like more instead of, you know, the behavior side of it, instead of like, well, clearly more like Jesus than like Odysseus or whoever, Heracles or whatever. It really, really captured me. I'm listening to this because I did not fully buy into mimesis criticism before I started reading your works. And when I read this one, I was like, wow, that was really, really good. The way you parallel so much of these things, and then how you asked your grandchild that, it really did leave an impression on me. And I was like, okay, now I got to read his other books.
And by the way, that book now is available in Arabic.
Wow. Arabic. So they did finally get it translated.
We got it. It's the marketing of it right now is complex. So I actually don't know how that's going. I hope to find out soon.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a copy of it myself yet, but marketing in the Middle East is not the same as it is in Amazon.
Yeah. Dennis, any final words from you?
I think you're to be commended for staying with MythVision and for encouraging people who are experts like myself and people who are not experts. And I think you're doing a marvelous job in educating people to think. You tend not to be dogmatic, but you can be strong. But you're becoming an expert on your own. So it's been a pleasure to be your friend and to talk with you.
Always, Dennis. You're always my friend. That'll never change. And yeah, I do hope we can do some more of these before you retire from life itself. We're all headed there, right? We're all headed there. So we want to have you back at some point, Dennis, and keep you going, give you something to, while you're still kicking, come in here and then into the ring and teach us some things. Always a student. I'm always a student. You're always a student. And I hope that we teach others to also remain students, Yeah.
And one way I've often ended a conversation like this is to encourage people who are watching to create something beautiful today. That's what myth making is. It's to make things beautiful and to make them livable and compassionate. And we certainly need some compassionate myth making right now.
Facts. Yes, sir. Everybody go get a copy of Dennis R. MacDonald's book, The Dionysian Gospel. If you're looking for his latest, greatest, he has obviously feuding gospel authors. You definitely should check out. And the one I brought up last was Mythologizing Jesus. He has several publications. If you're interested in taking his work further, I highly recommend getting them. I didn't even show you this one. This one's a really good reference source. It's massive. If someone invades your house at night, you can throw it at them and the enemy would be unconscious. The other reason you might want this book is that if a cold front comes in and you need to burn paper all night long to survive, you have enough there. But seriously, there's so much in this book that you can reference and see. Oh my gosh, there's like a ton of your life's work is in that book. So go support what he's doing, support what we're doing, like the video, share the video. Let's get more education on this material out there, especially now in the times that we're living in. And never forget, ladies and gentlemen, we are MythVision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.